Great. Well, thank you very much. I'm really excited to share some more with you about Hezekiah tonight. I've enjoyed this study so much. I don't think there's been any other study that I've done in the Word that I've enjoyed as much as Hezekiah. He was just a great king, a wonderful man who loved God. He loved God's people. He was committed to God. And he came from a father that was almost exactly the opposite, Ahaz. Ahaz was a very wicked and evil king. He was a horrible idolater of the first degree. He turned Judah and Jerusalem upside down with idolatry, and it was an absolute mess. And Isaiah was the prophet of the time, and he prophesied to Ahaz and told him to trust God. But Ahaz refused to trust God, and he wanted to make an alliance with the Assyrians. You see, he was very worried about Israel and Damascus. They were coming for them in Jerusalem, and they were the big question of the day was, what are we going to do about Samaria? What are we going to do about Damascus? They are breathing down our throat. So Ahaz, instead of trusting God, decided that he was going to make an alliance with the Assyrians. And the Assyrians were the superpower of the time, and they wreaked their havoc all over the region. And I'll show you, I'm going to share my screen right now, just how surrounded Jerusalem was by Assyrian control. Here in the gray area is all the region that is controlled by Assyria, all the way down to the Persian Gulf, all the way up here. Huge area. And here's Samaria, and here's Damascus. Those were Ahaz's immediate worries. But Ahaz, because he was worried about Samaria and because he was worried about Damascus, decided to get the Assyrians involved and try to make a deal with them. It backfired. But if you take a look right here, there's a gray circle right here, and it goes around Jerusalem. Tiny Jerusalem was the only independent area right smack in the middle of all the Assyrian control. They were really up against it. So things didn't go well for Ahaz. The Assyrians were breathing down their throat. And Isaiah tried to help him out, but he refused. And there were many signs involved. God gave Isaiah many signs to try to help out the situation. And one of the signs that he gave to Ahaz was that there would be a child born. Now, Isaiah already had two children that were signs too. One was in English known as a remnant will return, and the other one was swift to the spoil and quick to the plunder. The reason they were named that was because a remnant will return was a promise from God that the people who had gotten captured in Jerusalem and taken up to Samaria as slaves would come back. And then swift to the spoil and quick to the plunder. Can you imagine naming your kid this? Yeah, here, meet my son, swift to the spoil, quick to the plunder. Oh, why did you name him that? I'm glad you asked. His name is that because the Assyrians are going to come in, and it's going to be swift to the spoil and quick to the plunder. The Assyrians are going to take care of Damascus, and they're going to take care of Samaria, and you won't have a problem. This is what God prophesied for Ahaz, but Ahaz decided to make a deal with the Assyrians anyway. So we got these kids, and these kids are signs. And we've got another one coming up, and his name is Emmanuel. When Ahaz refused to trust God and he refused to ask for a sign, Isaiah had offered him. Ask God for a sign. Ask for anything you want. High or low, big or little. He said, oh no, can't do that. Well, the reason he refused is because he knew he'd already made a deal with the Assyrians. And he was hoping the Assyrians would save the day. Well, the Assyrians weren't going to save the day. But Isaiah told him, because you've not taken this opportunity to ask the Lord for a sign, there's going to be a sign given you. And it's Emmanuel. Take a look at Isaiah 7. Isaiah 7, verse 14. Here we go. Therefore, the Lord himself will give you all a sign. Behold, the young woman is pregnant and about to bear a son, and you, young woman, will call his name Emmanuel. This is the sign that's being given to Ahaz. He will eat butter and honey when he knows to refuse the evil and choose the good. For before the child knows to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land whose two kings you abhor will be forsaken. Samaria and Damascus, they'll be taken care of. Yahweh will bring on you, on your people, on your father's house, the days that have not come from the day that Ephraim separated from Judah, the king of Assyria. So the word was, don't worry about Damascus, don't worry about Samaria, but you better be worrying about the Assyrians because they're coming. And the sign to you will be a son that will be born, and his name will be Emmanuel. We're going to talk more about that later, but I just wanted to do a little recap there about a little bit about the signs and the children who were signs during the time. And when we left off last time, we left off with Hezekiah, and he had just had a miraculous happening right in Jerusalem. He had had a situation where the Assyrians had come in and they had brought their troops in. And we'll take a look at, I'm kind of flipping fast forward here into the time of Hezekiah now. Look at 2 Chronicles 32, verse 20. In Chronicles, we kind of have the Cliff Notes version of what happened. And what we have here are the Assyrian troops massing outside of Jerusalem. And verse 20 of 32 says, Hezekiah the king and Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amos, prayed because of this. They're in a tough situation. Their backs are up against the wall with Sennacherib wanting to come in and absolutely destroy Jerusalem. But they prayed because of this and cried out to heaven. Yahweh sent an angel who cut off all the mighty men of valor and the leaders and the captains in the camp of the king of Assyria. So he returned with shame of face to his own land when he had come into the house of his God. This is Sennacherib, the king of the Assyrians. Those who came out from his own bowels, his sons, killed him there with the sword. So there we have it. God sent an angel. There were, in another record of this same time period, says there were 185,000 dead Assyrians on the ground in one night. It was a miraculous intervention by God. So there we have Hezekiah waking up one morning and finding out that God had taken care of this really serious problem for them. What a God he is. He just sent an angel. And if you go on, we're going to pick this up in 2 Kings. 2 Kings 20, verse 1. So it starts out in those days. And the context is in those days, right after Sennacherib had been defeated, his troops, 185,000 of them died in one night because of the angel of the Lord. In those days was Hezekiah sick to the point of death, and Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amos, came to him and said, "This is what Yahweh says, set your house in order, for you are going to die and will not live." He'd been on top of the world with the death of all these Assyrians outside of Jerusalem, and now he's sick, he's terminally ill. And not only that, the prophet comes to him and tells him, "You are going to die. You will not live." And verse 2, then he turned his face to the wall and prayed to Yahweh, saying, "Remember now, Yahweh, I beg you, how I have walked before you in truth with a perfect heart, and have done what is good in your eyes." Hezekiah wept bitterly. And it came to pass before Isaiah had gone out into the middle part of the city, that the word of Yahweh came to him, saying, "Turn back and tell Hezekiah, the leader of my people, this is what Yahweh, the God of David your father, says. I have heard your prayer. I have seen your tears. Behold, I will heal you. On the third day you will go up to the house of Yahweh. I will add to your days 15 years. I will deliver you and this city out of the hand of the king of Assyria." See, the king of Assyria had walked away from this whole situation. He was not one of the 185,000 that died. He left and he went back to Nineveh, where he was later murdered by his own children. But there they were. Here he's sick. God's promising to heal him and to save him and the city from the power of the king of Assyria, because he's still alive. He could come back with more guys. God says, "I will defend this city for my own sake and for my servant David's sake." That means because God had promised to always have a descendant of David on the throne in Jerusalem. He had to save Jerusalem. He had to save Hezekiah, because Hezekiah didn't have any descendants at this point. His son Manasseh was 12 years old when he took the throne. So if Hezekiah is going to get 15 more years, that means Manasseh hadn't even been born yet. So God had to save them for his own sake, to keep somebody on the throne. And he certainly did. Isaiah said in verse 7, "Take a cake of figs," and they took it and laid it on the boil, and he recovered. Hezekiah said to Isaiah, "What will be the sign that Yahweh will heal me, and that I will go up to the house of Yahweh on the third day?" He knows that God will do these things for him, and this isn't a demand for a sign. This is a humble request for a sign. Isaiah said, "This will be the sign to you from Yahweh, that Yahweh will do the things that he has spoken. Should the shadow go forward 10 steps or go back 10 steps?" Hezekiah answered, "It is a light thing for the shadow to go forward 10 steps. No, let the shadow return backward 10 steps. We're always used to it going forward, but we need to make it go back. That'll be a real sign." So Isaiah the prophet cried out to Yahweh, and he brought the shadow on the stairway back 10 steps, that it had gone down on the stairway of Ahaz. That must have been a tremendous comfort to him. God told him that he would be healed. God told him that he would protect them, and that he made it available for him to have a sign to know that this was going to come to pass when he was so very ill. Look at verse 12. So during this same time, it starts out in verse 12, at that time. So we're in the same time frame here. And this sickness of Hezekiah's must have been pretty much in the same year that Sennacherib invaded, because 15 years added to his life puts him at the proper 59 years that he died. So if you take a look at verse 12, at that time, Baradak Baladan, the son of Baladan, king of Babylon, sent letters and a present to Hezekiah, for he had heard that Hezekiah had been sick. Well, in Chronicles, we learn that he had also heard about the wondrous thing that had happened in the land. In other words, the 185,000 dead Assyrians. The word got out all the way to Babylon. Babylon was far east from Jerusalem, and it was a long ways for them to make that trip to come to Jerusalem. But the word had traveled, and you would know that something like that would get around. The Babylonians, they hated the Assyrians. So anytime someone can say, yeah, we've had a tremendous victory against the Assyrians. In fact, 185,000 of them just wound up dead on the ground here one night. The Lord sent an angel. So King of Babylon sent letters and a present to Hezekiah. He's looking to make an alliance here. He wants to probably know how Hezekiah made this happen. So Hezekiah listened to them, and this is his first mistake. Hezekiah listened to these people from Babylon who were they were a pagan nation. He wasn't supposed to be making any alliances with these pagan nations. God had warned him, do not throw in with the Egyptians, do not throw in with the Sumerians, do not throw in with the Assyrians. Do not, I will protect you, I will protect you. And God always did protect them. And these guys show up with presents and a get well card, and all of a sudden he's listening to them. The king of Assyria showed up threatening to kill them all and wipe them out. And Hezekiah did the right thing. He ran to the Lord. Now these guys are showing up and they're kind of coming with the soft message. You know, here's a gift, Hezekiah. We so admire you. And he must have been terribly flattered that the Babylonians had come to find out about him and were so impressed by him. And so take a look at verse 24 or verse 14, just a little farther down here. Then Isaiah the prophet came to King Hezekiah, who had, I skipped a little bit. Let's go back up to 13. Hezekiah listened to them, these ambassadors from Babylon, and he showed them all the treasure house, the silver, the gold, the spices, the fine oil, and the house of his armor. And all that was found in his treasures, there was nothing in his house or in all his dominion that Hezekiah did not show them. He wasn't supposed to be making deals, and he should not have shown everything that the Lord had given them. And what he did here was he made Jerusalem a target. because now the Babylonians will know about all the riches and all the goodness and all their armaments that God had blessed them with. Now their enemy knows what they have. And then in verse 14, then Isaiah the prophet came to King Hezekiah and said to him, "What did these men say? And where did they come to you? From where did they come to you?" And Hezekiah said, "They have come from a far country, from Babylon." Then he said, "What have they seen in your house?" Hezekiah answered, "They have seen all that is in my house. There is nothing among my treasures that I have not shown them." Then Isaiah said to Hezekiah, "Hear the word of Yahweh. Behold, the days are coming when all that is in your house and that your fathers have stored up until this day will be carried to Babylon. Nothing will be left, says Yahweh. Of your sons who will come from you, whom you will father, they will take away, and they will be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon." Because Hezekiah had opened the door for the enemy to see what they had. He hadn't turned them away. It's a sad thing. So let's take a look at 2 Chronicles 32. It gives us a little bit more information about this situation. 2 Chronicles 32, verse 24. It tells us, in those days Hezekiah was sick to the point of death, and he prayed to Yahweh, and he spoke to him and gave it. He prayed to Yahweh, and he spoke to him and gave him a sign, the sign of the shadow. But Hezekiah did not respond according to the benefit done to him, for his heart was proud. So there was wrath on him and on Judah and Jerusalem. It tells us here why Hezekiah did what he did when the Babylonians showed up. His heart was proud. He'd been wealthy. He'd been powerful. He'd been successful. And he'd been the man. I mean, he had stood up against the Assyrians, tiny, tiny little Jerusalem in the middle of that huge Assyrian empire had stood against him. He was a big deal, and he probably felt like a big deal. He forgot who had made this all happen, that the Lord had made this happen. He was proud. So I don't want to be too tough on old Hezekiah here, because he's a fantastic man, and he loved the Lord, and he did so much for the people of Judah and Jerusalem. He brought the whole area back to worshiping God in the temple. He eliminated the idolatry all over Jerusalem. He was just an amazing king. And it says there was none like him before or after. That's what a great king he was. But he did make a mistake here to open up to the Assyrians, or open up to the Babylonians, I mean. Look at 2 Chronicles 32:32. This gives us a little summary. Now the rest of the acts of Hezekiah and his good deeds, behold, they are written in the vision of Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amos, in the book of the kings of Judah and Israel. His good deeds, that is a very high compliment to Hezekiah. In another version, I think it's the Holman Christian Standard Bible, it says his deeds of love, or his loving deeds. He did love the Lord. and he did his best to make things right in Judah and Jerusalem. And I want to talk again about the signs that we had, the signs that his father Ahaz had been given. We had the boys named A Remnant Will Return. We had the other boy that was named Swift to the Spoil and Quick to the Plunder. But we had another boy who was coming on the scene, who was a sign to Ahaz. And that boy, we're going to take a look at in Isaiah chapter, let's go to Isaiah 8. Isaiah 8 in verse 18. There we go. This is Isaiah talking, and he's talking about the signs, the boys that are signs. Verse 18, behold, I and the children whom Yahweh has given me, are for signs and wonders in Israel from Yahweh of armies who dwells on Mount Zion. He was saying right there, these children were given to me as signs from Yahweh. And when they tell you, this was one of the reasons they were given, when they tell you, the other people in the area, consult the spirits of the dead and the spiritists who chirp and mutter. Should not a people consult with their God? Should they consult the dead on behalf of the living? These children were given to remind people that they were to turn to Yahweh. Look at chapter 9. So there's one more child here in chapter 9, verse 6. This is a child whose name is Emmanuel. Emmanuel means God with us. Now, the boy's name wasn't literally Emmanuel, but having him would be an indication that God was with us. It was going to be good times. It wasn't going to be hard times like with Ahaz and all the idolatry. Look at Isaiah 9, verse 6 regarding Emmanuel. For a child will be born to us, a son will be given to us, and the government will be on his shoulders, and his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty Hero, Father of the Coming Age, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of authority and of peace there will be no end upon the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to sustain it with justice and with righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of Yahweh of armies will do this. This is what the boy did, the boy named Emmanuel. And if you take a look back and you read through about this boy was to be born to Ahaz. The boy's name, Hezekiah. Hezekiah was the first to be called Emmanuel. Hezekiah was the child will be born, a son will be given to us. The government will be on his shoulders. His name will be Wonderful Counselor. He was going to be a fantastic king. And this was a great blessing to Isaiah when God gave him this revelation. No longer was there going to be a dirty, rotten scoundrel Ahaz king, but God was promising that the son of Ahaz was going to be a wonderful king. The child that will be born to us. He's later also called the root of Jesse. When I read these verses, I only read them in relationship to them referring to Jesus Christ coming later. But these signs had to mean something to Ahaz at the time. And because of that, we know that they're speaking of Hezekiah here. So he was a wonderful guy. Take a look at 2 Kings 18. That just blew my mind. I had never read those verses and thought of anything but the future fulfillment of the wonderful counselor, the child that would be born. But when I read it in context, it's clear to see that it was first about Hezekiah, and then the immediate fulfillment was Hezekiah. The future fulfillment was the Lord Jesus Christ, who would be King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and the Messiah of all Messiahs. Hezekiah was a Messiah to Jerusalem at that time. These verses were spoken about him, but they're about Jesus later on, the ultimate Messiah. And in 2 Kings 18, I better get there. I thought this was really just so thrilling. What a man he must have been. 2 Kings 18, verse 1. Or this is we'll start in verse 2. This is a little recap of Hezekiah. He was 25 years old when he began to reign. He reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Abi, the daughter of Zechariah. He did right. He did what was right in the eyes of Yahweh, according to all that David, his father, had done. He removed the high places and broke the standing stones and cut down the Asherah, and he broke in pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made, for in those days the children of Israel burned incense into smoke perfume to it, and he called it Nehushtan, that bronze thing. Verse 5, he trusted in Yahweh, the God of Israel, so that there was none like him among all the kings of Judah that came after him, nor among those that were before him. For he held fast to Yahweh. He did not depart from following him, but kept his commandments, which Yahweh commanded Moses. Hezekiah is the perfect picture of what it means to trust God. And that's why we decided to call this series What Trust Looks Like, because Hezekiah was a great picture of what it means to love and trust the Lord. So thanks for being here with me tonight. Let me share this. It's been so fun. Love you guys.